Kia ora. Noao, South Australia. Kao, in Noho, Ana, Port Wollonga, Ghana country. Namani, which is are you good in Ghana. Mani Napudni, it's good you came. Nainari, Rachel Godoy. Godoy is a Spanish name. I married a Venezuelan. I had a very English name, and now everyone has a lot of trouble pronouncing my last name. I'm very humbled to be up here today, and it's been an amazing couple of days with some pretty amazing speakers, so I'm feeling very humbled that I'm standing up here. My brother passed away about 4 weeks ago, which is still very raw, so I honestly didn't think I'd be here, but I'm really glad to be here, and I feel extremely re-energised by the last 2 days. So this is our team. So I'm also very brave because I'm standing up here talking about forestry in front of everybody, but this is our team in South Australia. So this is our ranger team, I should say, at Forestry SA. We've got a bit of a motley bunch, but I thought I might introduce them so you can get a bit of an understanding who we are. We've got Alison on the far left. She's a neighbour to the forest. She's got an agricultural PhD and she's a horticulturalist by trade and is really keen to get involved with what's happening next door to her property. So she's become a ranger and she's brilliant. She's extremely intelligent and she's very good at analysing everything. She's very smart. We've got Bruno there next over. He's been with forestry for nearly 40 years. So he's one of these people that has been there for a really long time, was originally a forester and then wanted to be a ranger. And these days he's just a really good mentor for some of the new rangers in compliance. So he gives them lots of support with compliance. The next fellow there that's hugging them is Eric. Yeah. Eric's been a park ranger for over 20 years and he joined our team this year, which is awesome. And he is a founding member of SARA, so he helped get that in place in South Australia. So he's brought to our team some really great experience and he's been really good and his enthusiasm is rubbing off really well, which is awesome. Luke, the other hairy man, he came across from CFS and the manager at the time could see that he had good potential, so he's one of our other rangers that works with Eric. Cass has just joined us. She came across as a firefighter as well, really keen to be a ranger. We won't worry about that one. Then there's Callum. Callum has come across from national parks as well. So in the 2.5 years I've been at Forestry SA, I've nabbed 2 people, brought them over with me. And he's been great. Kenny, almost at the end, is a paramedic. And he's very professional and he loves being a ranger as well. So he just does casual work with us when he's not being a paramedic. And the last fella on the end there is Dean. And Dean is an Aboriginal ranger. He only found out he was an Aboriginal man about 14 years ago because his mum is from the stolen generation. And so his family ties are, I always get emotional when I talk about him, his family ties are from the Pilbara, which is in the northern Western Australia. He was brought up being told that he was Italian. That's why he had dark skin. So he's extremely passionate about reconciliation and so am I, and so we're working really hard together to really make that rub off in this organisation and do some good things. So it's a pleasure to work with Dean. So yeah, forestry. How could that have anything to do with inclusive conservation? This is usually what it makes you think of. A few words come to mind with a photo like that. Deforestation, land clearance, land degradation. That's a photo that was taken about 20 years ago, and that's me. In another part of Australia, South Australia doesn't have very many big trees, so I went to this particular part of the country to see some of this sort of landscape and was very disappointed with some of the things that I found. And I didn't climb to the top of that stump to be a mountaineer and conquer it. I climbed to the top to get a really good feel for the magnitude that that tree would have been. And it's one of the, I think it's the tallest flowering eucalypt species in the world. He nods at the back there, you know where this is. Would have been like well over 100 metres tall, hundreds of years old. It would have existed before 1788, before colonisation. It would have seen the land managed so much better. And it was clear-felled for economic gain in the blink of an eye. So I'm having a bit of a cry on the top of there, and I asked for someone to take a photo because I just couldn't believe that that stuff was still happening in Australia. So I just wanted to share that because that's my background, and at that time I never would have thought I'd be standing here representing a forestry corporation. So that's about 20 years ago, and at that same time I was also a park ranger for national parks in South Australia, and I was based here on Eyre Peninsula, which is a stunning part of the country. And I was in a small team. We had 4 rangers and we were managing an area about the size of Tassie. So big country, 12 island parks as well with no boat. So we often had to borrow a boat from somebody to get across to do work on some of the islands. It's improved a bit now. That was about 20 years ago. And it's awesome country, it's beautiful. So our main responsibilities were Lincoln National Park and Coffin Bay National Park. And that's on Nauru and Mangala country. And this was the main park I was looking after, which was Lincoln National Park. And at the time, you could often hear me say, if I could only build 2 big 10-foot high fences with big locked gates at the start of the peninsula and keep all the people out, I could actually look after the park properly. Yeah, but I think with age comes wisdom. Sorry, I'm extremely nervous. I'm not very good at talking to this many people. So, over the past 20 years, I've learnt that you can't remove people from parks. They need to mix. People need to experience our wild places to gain an appreciation for it and therefore an interest in its protection. People need to understand our wild and natural places to become advocates for it. Humans can't become emotional and fight for conservation if they don't have a personal and emotional attachment to it. And they will be our advocates if they really understand it. And they need to feel the awe and the wonder. Now, well, most of us will look at that and go, that's pine trees, they're a bunch of weeds. But to the average Joe, which is exactly how I still struggle to get my brain into, but to the average person, there's a lot of awe and wonder in that, and they will go into a forest like that and the wind will stop and the fog will be in there and there'll be all these little mushrooms and they'll connect. So it is a place to still connect with nature. And I have also learnt that there is an important place in society and in climate change mitigation for forestry. And I grew up on a farm, so I get primary production, and I know that it's important. And primary production can be done really poorly, or it can be done well. And I've worked with farmers to map threatened species on their property, help them to protect native veg from stock, and some of them can be really good advocates for the environment and work really well with the land that they're looking after. So I do believe that there is a place for it. In South Australia, most of the native veg is very fragmented and often quite small. So by increasing the linkages between those pockets of native veg and working with the different neighbours and right across the landscape, you have a much better result. So that includes working with private property owners. So what do you think when you see that photo? It's a bit different. Not quite so much the deforestation, land clearance and land degradation, given none of those plantations had been clear-felled. So it might look a bit different if some of them had been. There's also a big airstrip in the middle, which isn't usually that's the only one that's in that area. So this is Kaipo Forest, which we manage, and it's a patch that I'm responsible for. So the pine plantations are managed for forestry, but the native veg is set aside for conservation only. So we never clear native veg, ever. We look after the land of the Kaurna, the Peremank, the Ngarrindjeri and the Ramangeri people. And this particular country is shared Kaurna and Peremank country. So this native vegetation here is called Christmas Hill Native Forest Reserve, and it sits adjacent to Kiama Conservation Park. So that's managed by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Unfortunately, the Native Forest Reserve name is a name that's given, and it's misunderstood, it's given to an area that we've had gazetted back in the 80s for conservation only, and it should be called a conservation reserve, but unfortunately our legislation's from 1950, and it's the name that we're stuck with, and unless we change the legislation, which we don't have the resources or the money given to us by the state government to do so, we get stuck with native forest reserve. So it's a bit unfortunate because it can be very misunderstood. So at a landscape scale, Christmas Hill Native Forest Reserve and Kiama Conservation Park create about 800 hectares of contiguous protected native veg, which isn't a big area, but in the Adelaide Hills it's reasonably significant. So our primary role is still sustainable wood production, but our other key responsibilities are the protection of environmental and cultural values, and we have an obligation to do so, and to responsibly support community use and recreation. So in 1875, about 150 years ago, the Conservator of Forests was introduced in South Australia, and that was in response to mass land clearance that was occurring at the time, and recognition that that was unsustainable. So there needed to be trees planted for wood production to stop land clearance, or at least provide some sort of a sustainable resource. So we were the first forestry organisation in Australia, and Belair State Nursery was established in the late 1800s and still operates within Belair National Park today. And back in the 1800s, wood was everything. It was used for absolutely everything. So you can imagine planting trees for wood production was really important at the time. So it's been nearly 150 years and things have changed quite significantly. It was quite large at one stage. In 2012, things were downsized massively. The state government decided to sell everything that was productive in the southeast to a Canadian company, and we were changed to Forestry SA. And now we have 30 people and are responsible for 10,000 hectares of pine plantation and 4,000 hectares of native veg for conservation. So a third of what we do is conservation. Most of our forests sit within an hour's drive of Adelaide. So that's Adelaide there. So I can't put any fences and lock gates up anymore. We have about 1 million visitors a year, and we're really accessible from the city. And most of the dark patches that you can see on the Fleurieu Peninsula there next to Adelaide are land that we look after. However, even though I can't put a locked gate up, I'm in a really good position now all of a sudden that I wasn't in before. We might have 1 million visitors a year that all want to come out and do all their recreating, but I can keep diverting them into plantations and out of the conservation areas. So they can still get the experience they want, but with less impact on conservation areas. You guys might relate to that. Constantly asked if new walking and mountain bike trails can be cut into conservation areas, and I get to keep saying no, go back into the plantation. I can keep people happy most of the time. Some people still complain, they still want a goat track through a native veg area. But most of our conservation areas contain quite highly diverse, good quality remnant vegetation, and they're set aside for conservation, so I can keep asking them not to go in there. And most people in Adelaide wouldn't know that we're the ones that are looking after them. So we manage about 300 kilometres of walking, bike riding and multi-use trails, and most of them in plantations. We're also responsible for Fox Creek Bike Park, which sits, I don't know if you can see the red star at the top, sits fairly close to Adelaide. And in the map there, it's that dark green, it's the light green patch just to the bottom right of the 7. So in those patches that you can see there on the map on the right, everything that's a light green is a pine plantation, and the dark green patches are native forest reserves. The brown patches are conservation parks. So you can see where we've got Cuddly Creek Native Forest Reserve, it sits adjacent Montague Conservation Park. So between those three areas, they cover a much larger area of contiguous native vegetation. So the bike park sits within a plantation, and it was constructed over the past 30 years by volunteers, situated in Cuddly Creek Forest Reserve, and sits on Kaurna country, which is now native title. And I didn't mention before, but Kaurna have the first native title over any capital city in Australia, I believe, at the moment, which is quite significant. So So as you can see so these are reservoirs up here, the blue parts, which is managed by the SA Water Corporation or SA Water. And it's really important. I love landscape scale collaboration and working with neighbours, as I said before, but that includes government agencies as well. So we work really closely with SA Water and National Parks to make sure that we're doing some landscape scale projects there as well to make a bigger bang for our buck. And we have some awesome colleagues in our partner agencies. And we've just reintroduced our ranger team back into Sahara after quite a few years. And I feel like we're doing some really positive things, which is good. So Fox Creek Bike Park was basically established in the early 1990s. Essentially because at the time, I think that was around the time that mountain biking was starting to boom, which it's done a huge boom in Australia, and I'm assuming exactly the same in New Zealand, really fast, and there were community members building illegal trails in one of those good quality pieces of native veg, so they were encouraged to go across into the plantation and start building trails there. And it has perfect topography for world-class mountain bike trails, and it sits within 45 minutes of Adelaide. It's part of a multi-day bike riding trail, and it also has an old forester's house in the middle which people can use for accommodation, so we have school kids and groups coming and staying there and riding trails. The State Mountain Bike Plan of 2001 recognised Cuddly Creek Forest as a key project for testing sustainable trail design in local soils and landscapes, and there's 3 or 4 really good professional trail builders in South Australia that are used a lot by national parks, and they were trained here in the early 1990s. So it's been quite significant for sustainable trail design. And it created a unique opportunity to establish new trails on environmentally sustainable gradients. In the summer of, we've mentioned this earlier, but in the summer of 2019-2020, we had lots of fires all over Australia. And on Friday, the 20th of December in 2019, fires occurred in the Mount Lofty Ranges, which were during really catastrophic conditions. And our fire danger rating, usually catastrophic conditions, is just really hot. There's no humidity left at all. Everything's bone dry, and we've got some nice hot northerly winds. So it's just perfect. If something starts, it's hard to get a control of. And this was a good example of that. And the colours that you can see on there, the red is extremely hot. So that's really high burn intensity. And you can see most of that started right within the heart of Cuddly Creek Forest. And it ripped through the landscape and burnt out about just over 23,000 hectares of private and public property. And it devastated communities. For conservation, it opened up the country to weed incursions and pest animals. Threatened species become more vulnerable, as everyone in this room knows, with loss of habitat. And in some areas of Cuddly Creek, it experienced heat so extreme that even the native eucalypt species haven't been able to recover, and all the seed bank in the soil has been completely destroyed. So some of the statistics put out by the CFS at the time, which is the Country Fire Service in South Australia, were that 98 homes were destroyed, 56 homes were damaged, there was 1 person killed, and about 51 firefighters injured, I think. Close to 4,000 livestock lost. But you'll note that they didn't include any natural assets, which never seem to get included. So there's nothing there about natural assets lost, whether that's forests, national parks, on SA Waterland or anything, which is a bit of a shame, and we're trying to push for that to be included. So, while we were working hard to do things like pest, animal and weed control and re-veg and helping private landholders to recover, there's a huge social aspect that comes out of a bushfire, where people are completely devastated. They've lost everything, even right down to not having a letterbox anymore for their mail to be delivered to, through to all sorts of things. So the community were really keen to get Fox Creek Bike Park back up and running as a positive thing. And from a social aspect, that was really important at the time. So the mountain bike community applied for some federal disaster recovery funding and got about $2.4 million to build it back. And since then, we've reinstated 50 kilometres of the 80-kilometre trail network and worked with clubs and community groups to do that. So we think we get about, at the moment, we get about 160,000 visitors there a year, so it's very popular. And it still hasn't got toilets. So part of that recovery funding, yeah, I know, landmines galore. No, thankfully across the road, there's a winery that benefits greatly out of this place. So everyone goes over there and has a drink and uses the toilet, I'm assuming. Yeah. So excitingly, we've nearly got some toilets. So through that money, we've got a toilet, car park, and a few pieces of infrastructure that are just critical when you're getting 160,000 people there every year. So if you can see those very well, the operations people salvage whatever they could out of the pines, and they've since been cleared and replanted. Most of that's already been replanted. And usually they'll take a couple of years to replant, but they've done that as quick as possible, just part of social recovery and making it look a bit better quicker. And as you can imagine, the winery, the cafe, the tavern, the caravan park, they're all right back getting to this park back up and running because it's good for them and it's good for tourism because they've lost all their visitors. So they've been actively involved. So it's been good from an economic point of view. From an environmental point of view, we've been working with National Parks and SA Water to do landscape scale pest management. So in the last 2 years, we've removed 1,892 goats, 86 feral sheep and 9 deer. And I'm a bit surprised it's only 9 deer because we get a few deer, but perhaps not so much in this particular area. And we've had a Judas goat out this year to try and round up those last stragglers that are always left behind. So that's had 3 aerial helicopter operations as well over the last 2 years. We've also got some priority weeds in there, like gorse, of course, which I notice you have plenty of here in New Zealand. We've had Watsonia in low density, so we're trying to get rid of that. Montpellier broom, English broom. We've got some arum lily in the creek, and that's an emerging weed, so we're just trying to get rid of that before it even gets established, because once it gets going, it'll be difficult to stop. And we've had some grants as well. And at the moment, I'm working with one of our Ghana emerging elders. I'm going to show a photo of him in a minute, just to find out a bit more about some of the Ghana history, so we can do some interpretive signage and things like that for all those 160,000 people. Oh, crap. Wow, that came around quick. We have involved the mountain bike clubs in re-veg, so getting them to put back into the park, not just to build trails, but to put back in with planting some native veg. We've done some direct seeding as well. Miraculously, Thomas Hill House, the forester's house, is still standing there. It's gone through Ash Wednesday and this fire, and it's still there. So we had an artist in residence stay there for a couple of weeks and do a whole heap of conservation art of all the conservation features in the area. And because the bushfire started at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, that threw a whole nother thing in the mix for us. With people not being able to go interstate or overseas, they were looking for something to do. So all the mountain bike shops sold out all the time with bikes, and they're all looking for somewhere to go. And Fox Creek Bike Park was gone, so they decided they'd just create trails somewhere else. So we had trail networks popping up all over the joint. So it was just constantly going back to that ranger team, just trying to get them all out of native veg and going back into the plantations and saying, look, you can build them here, that's not going to do anything, build and ride over here. So a lot of work with a few clubs that have decided to just take their own initiative and build some more trails and work with them in a positive way. And then contractors. So we've of course engaged a whole heap of contractors to do a lot of the work to build this place back, so they've benefited from it as well from an economic point of view. So for us, we're a bit unique for a forestry corporation, and we've evolved a lot since 1875. I'm sure historically it's been a massive organisation that's just been all about wood production, but now we're so little and we've got to balance those 3 things really well. As I said, a third of what we do is conservation of areas like this, and I love working with that amazing human in the middle. That's Uncle Tamaru. He's an emerging Ghana elder, and he's so inspiring, and he's the sort of person that you really connect to. And he talks a lot about walking side by side, not one in front of the other, always together. And he talks about listening. And he always looks at me and says, but I mean listening, Rachel. Not just like, you know, my wife does when I'm telling her a story and she's thinking about something else, but really listen to what I'm saying. And he'll sit down and he'll talk about things in a really good way that gets people to connect. And it's really exciting because our CEO is really on board with reconciliation at the moment. And he's starting to do things that he's never done before. And it's rippling across the organisation, which is super exciting. And we've got our first reconciliation action plan, which is just a piece of paper, but it makes our board and our CEO think about it and make it an action, and it's actually corporate business. So it's super exciting. And we are audited by Responsible Wood. We've just come through an audit recently, which means that we have to be, we're certified as an Australian national governing body for the program of the endorsement of forest certification. So we have to be sustainable. So I'm trying to be above that line and be positive about it. And I think it was Chelsea said something yesterday about, I love what I do because I know it and I know what I do. And I just wanted to share that story because I know as a room of conservationists, we don't often look at something like this industry positively, but I really feel like we're making a really positive change in this particular organisation. So, yeah. Now I'm scared. Don't throw rotten tomatoes at me. Am I supposed to point people out? Yes.
I like to ask the hard questions. So there's an increasing demand for timber products because of after the pandemic and things like
shortage.
that. Yeah. So how are you incorporating that into the strategy?
Yeah, so I don't actually have anything to do with the commercial ops side of things, but we have to understand what's going on in what we're doing. We have certain standards that we have to meet. So they've upped the amount of wood that they're extracting, but they have to consider a whole heap of things, like they can't operate if it's too wet because there's erosion issues, and they won't go in and extract too much so that it becomes sustainable. It's got to meet those benchmarks. So there's a whole heap of stuff they get audited on where they can't start going overboard too much. The other thing that's interesting is that most of the forest in the Adelaide Hills was all burnt in 1983 in the Ash Wednesday bushfires, and they've got the perfect age for clearfell, for pines, is 30 to 48 years. So they're all maturing at that same time, but they've still got to go around and try and do it in a way that isn't mass clearance, so they're trying to do it in ways that they're doing small blocks here and there. It's super complicated. I wouldn't be working in that area of business. They've got to try and consider all sorts of stuff. So yes, they have had to respond to the wood shortage, and they keep getting asked for more, and they just started saying, no, we can't take any more out. And they had wood to take out, but they stopped. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if this is correct, but ETS is carbon taxes. It's a
Mm.
big thing in this country.
Yeah.
You know, briefly what's happening.
Yeah, no idea. That would be my answer. I'm not sure, and it's not something that I'm looking after, but yeah, I know that they've been looking into, the CEO's been looking into a grant recently about trying to get, because we don't have any funding. This is the other thing I just want to explain. Everyone says, but you sell wood, you must have millions of dollars, but we don't have much plantation, so because we're a state government corporation, we have a KPI that we come out cost neutral to the government. We're not allowed to cost the government anything. So whatever we make in wood sales actually just covers our overheads. We're not left with much left behind, which is a shame because we've got all this stuff that needs to be done from a recreation and conservation point of view as well. So I can't answer your question, I'm sorry. Yeah.
How's your model being taken on by other states and other organisations within South Australia? Is it being welcomed or are you getting resistance?
Not that I'm aware of, and I think the fact that we don't make much money out of wood makes me suggest that it might not be, yeah.
The ACT is very similar with the
Is it?
forestry
There you go.
operation.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so focused on the recreation and
Everything
community
you
use
said
and
makes sense
conservation. I
to me.
don't tend to, we're so small.
How's the trail network impacted by the logging operations?
A lot. Yeah, so the rangers, one of their biggest things is just constantly talking to commercial ops, because they'll come in and say that area's closed and they've got to reroute trails, close off bits. We have over 200 community events that we've got to manage as well, so orienteering, road gaining, all the things that you get in parks. And so we've got to analyse each of those and say, well, you can't go here, you can go here. So that's probably the key difference in their ranger role to a park ranger role.
One more question.
Yeah, again, yeah, I don't have anything to do with that. Yeah.
I can answer that. It's not a big, 80% of nutrients go straight back in our labs. So it's not like you take everything away. It's like carbon that's all locked up as well. So, because I'm in a similar situation, half of our park is Brennan Cross. And yeah, it's not as dramatic as people always assume.
Yeah, and I was sort of, I also find it in some ways quite interesting that we have all the other primary production sectors and don't seem to be as concerned about it, but for some reason, I think because it's the big trees and, they're pumping stuff in the soil and everything too. But